It took some time, but at last the steamies and diesels were working very hard. There was no fuss, no bother, and no complaining. The steamies and diesels all wanted to be really useful. And Class 40 was as good as his words. When Gordon was struggling up Gordon's hill, he buffered up behind the brake van and pushed him all the way to the top. Gordon was very impressed. Thomas spoke to James. "See," he chuckled, "we always finish our jobs when we work together." And James had to admit he was right. Later that evening, James had to take some scrap to the smelters. He couldn't stop thinking how his plan had worked. He had gotten all the engines to cooperate. But when he arrived at the smelters, he had a nasty surprise. He saw an engine he thought he would never see again. The big and bad Diesel 10. Diesel 10 was the island's strongest diesel. He was very big, mean, and had a very strong hydraulic claw. It was used for grabbing scrap and placing them into heavy freight cars. When Diesel 10 saw James, he snarled and hoisted his claw above him. "Full steam ahead!" cried James, and he shot off like a jackrabbit out of the scrapyard. Diesel 10 watched him go with satisfaction and continued on with his work. The days went on, but at last the airport was finished. The airport had shiny windows, gleaming doors, and a huge tall control tower. And the runway was smooth for any airplane to land. All the engines were very excited. They began chatting like old friends. "I can't wait to see an airplane for the first time," beamed Percy. "Those planes better watch my swerves," complained Daisy. All the engines laughed. But there was still one more job to do. James was shunting more trucks full of material for the runway. He was busy thinking about how shiny the airport would be, and he wasn't paying attention. Suddenly, he crashed into the buffers, and the trucks came off the track and headed straight for the water tower. Everyone gasped. "Timber!" Then, with a sudden jolt, the water tower came crashing down. Then there was a huge crack under the runway. "Oh no!" cried Percy. "The runway's cracked, and the track is blocked." "Shiver me timbers, M.A.G.I.C, cried Salty. "All the hard work's been wasted." "We'll have the cracks measured," he said. "But unless it can't be repaired, the airplane will have to return to base." All the engines sighed with defeat. They had worked real hard for this new project, but it had all been wasted. Diesel glared at James. "Trust that good-for-nothing rusty red scrap iron to mess things up yet again." Mavis was horrified. "Leave him alone, Diesel," she snapped. "It wasn't his fault. He wasn't paying attention." Diesel scoffed. "Says you. He deliberately caused me to run into the sheds that was for them useless steam pots. And he deliberately delayed our future for the railway." The steam engines were cross with the diesels. "Says the diesel who's always causing trouble around the yard," huffed Donald. "Aye," agreed Douglas. "You're nothing but a muckle nuisance." "You useless claptraps are always barging in and always ruining our place," scoffed the diesel. "No, we did not," huffed Percy crossly. "You filthy diesel started all of it by being rude to us." Soon the engines began fighting and arguing about who was to blame. They had completely forgotten all about working together and putting aside their differences. At last, Thomas blew his whistle, and Mavis blasted her horn. "Enough!" shouted Thomas. "This is no time to play the blame game. We have to think of an idea how to fix this." "Right," agreed Mavis. "Have you all forgotten that steam engines and diesel engines are equal? After James got us in this mess, you diesels have been insulting the steamers much further when they had nothing to do with this mess." All the engines stayed silent after this. "Thank you, Mavis," said Emily calmly. Thomas looked all around. "Now does anyone have any bright ideas?" Soon the first airplane had touched the skies and was getting close to the island. Everyone thought and thought, but no one had any ideas of how to fix the mess. James sighed. He knew this was all his fault. Just then, Thomas had an idea. "What if we used Harvey to help clear up the mess?" he said. "That's not possible," said Toby. "Harvey's clearing debris on the other side of the island. He would never get there on time." The engine sighed. "No airplane means no passengers," sighed Daisy. "And no passengers means no airplanes," sighed Percy. Just then, James had an idea. "Thomas," he steamed, "we could ask Diesel 10 for help." Thomas gasped. "But James, you know what Diesel 10 is like. He doesn't like us steam engines. I think he would hurt us." "It's either Diesel 10's help or no airplanes," said James. "And I want to fix this all." Thomas sighed. He knew James had a point. So the both of them steamed away before anyone could ask any more questions. James and Thomas were worried about asking Diesel 10, but they still had to be very brave. Diesel 10 was angrily clearing scrap and loading them into trucks. Thomas and James were very worried. As Diesel 10 saw them, he growled loudly. "Be brave," whispered Thomas. James took a deep breath. "Excuse me, Diesel 10, he quivered. Diesel 10's claw cranked. Then Ari and Bert pulled alongside him. "What do you want?" snarled Diesel 10. Thomas looked to James, and James gulped nervously. We need your help over at the airport. Some trucks have been derailed, and it's all because of me." Diesel 10 groaned. "Why would we help you useless claptraps?" muttered Ari. "When we've got our own work to do," grunted Bert. "Because if the airplane doesn't land and the airport gets shut down, there will be no vacationers. And with no vacationers, the railway won't be useful. And then none of us engines will be useful for anything except for scrap." Diesel 10 thought for a moment. "Maybe we'll help you. Later." "Later?" quivered Thomas. "We need your help now," said James. "What does it matter?" grunted Diesel 10. "We help you, we'll go back to hating you, and you'll go back to hating us. Go figure." James sighed. "I know you diesels wanted to make a good impression. I know you're just trying to be admired by doing your jobs. And forgive me, I've wanted to as well. But all I did was insult others, you included. I was so vain that I took advantage of myself and others around me. I've jeopardized everything." Thomas agreed. "We've already let Sir Topham Hatt down once. We're not going to do it again. Besides, if you help us, you will be the most useful engine of all. Not just you, Diesel 10, but every engine on the island." Diesel 10 then lowered his claw. "All right," grumbled Diesel 10. We'll help you, just this once. Thomas and James were relieved. Diesel 10, Ari, and Bert were very grumpy because they had to work at the scrap yards, but they still wanted to be really useful like all engines. Just then, James thought of something. The runway, he said. It still needs to be flattened. It's still too bumpy. Then Thomas spoke up. I'll collect George the steamroller when we fix the tracks, he said. That made James feel proud. When they got to the airport, all the engines were surprised to see Diesel 10 of all engines come to help with the wreckage. Grind my gears, cried Splatter. Is that Diesel 10? Gasped Dodge. The biggest and baddest diesel of the island? Not so scaredy after all, huffed Percy proudly. Soon Diesel 10, James, and Thomas got to work. Diesel 10 used his claw to clear the debris and load them into the freight cars. There you go. That's the last of them, he called to James, and James shunted them away. Thomas, Ari, and Bert helped too. They gently re-railed the cars that James had derailed before. Grind my gears, exclaimed Ari. This is harder than it looks, groaned Bert. Keep puffing, cried Thomas. We must keep going. We must save the airport. Come on, everyone, whistled James. We all must work together. That way the airplane will still be able to come. That inspired all the steamies and diesels to join in and help too. They worked as hard as they could and as fast as they could. Diesel 10 worked the hardest, and none were as tired as James. He couldn't have been more happier. As soon as the mess was cleared, Thomas raced away to get George and Jack. George wasn't particularly happy with having to help repair the roads and the railways, but he still wanted to be really useful. Then Thomas raced back and collected Jack and Alfie. They were super excited to work near the airport. Jack and Alfie beamed with excitement as they got to work. More gravel means more fun, exclaimed Alfie. Wow, shouted Jack. I've never seen this many gravel for me to lift with my bucket. Even George was having fun, albeit very slowly when smoothing the runway. Soon Sir Topham Hatt touched down to the airport with Harold the helicopter. Well done, chaps, he boomed. The airplane will soon be landing soon. Well done, all of you, said Sir Topham Hatt. The engines were very excited. James spoke to Diesel, and then at Diesel 10. I'm sorry for causing this mess, he said quietly. You are just as useful as us steam engines. And working with you diesels was fun after all. Diesel and Diesel 10 grinned. Well, I guess working with you, steamers wasn't that bad. I'm sorry for getting Splatter and Dodge to turn against you. Diesel 10 grinned. You did good there, kid. You did good. Well done to you, James, whistled Edward. Smashing job, matey, cried Salty. We are all really useful engines, chimed Toby. So does that mean we can stop being enemies and work together as a family? Added Splatter and Dodge. All the engines agreed. They all knew that steamies and diesels were different, but they all liked to pull passengers and freight, and best of all, they liked to be really useful. Just then, A loud noise cut through the air. It was the first airplane. It zoomed over the engines and touched down on the runway. Everyone waved at the engines. All the engines were so excited they blew their whistles and blasted their air horns. The noise echoed through the airport. As soon as the noise died out, the Steamies and Diesels could get back to work and do their favorite things together. When the engines got to Topham Sheds, they were surprised. The sheds had been rebuilt and redecorated. "It feels good to be home," sighed Henry. "The more the merrier," sighed Edward. Gordon sniffed. "I like the other sheds better." "Oh, it's great to be back in our warm, cozy sheds," sighed James. "I'm sorry for putting you all into this." Just then, Percy saw an extra berth. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. "Sir," he peeped, "we have 7 spaces here." "That's right," said Sir Topham Hatt. "The 7th berth is for Emily. She will be a fine addition to the team." Emily couldn't believe it. She was accepted by Sir Topham Hatt and allowed into Topham Sheds. Soon the engines were in their warm, cozy sheds. They couldn't wait to tell their day's adventures, their stories, how engines should work together, steam or diesel, and about more passengers in airplanes. Thomas and James were the most excited of all, and they couldn't be more happier.